Welcome to Cool Talk. George Herbert Walker Bush, 41st President of the United States. Now, he was born in 1924. His father was an investment banker, but it was his mother, Dorothy, who was the real influence. On the day she gave birth to her first child, she was playing baseball. She actually hit a home run. Then she went to the hospital to give birth. She was one tough cookie. Now, Bush's father was Prescott Bush. He was an investment banker, had money, so Bush led a privileged childhood. But at 19, he went to World War II. He joined the Navy and became the youngest bomber pilot. Bush flew 58 bombing missions, and on one of these missions, his plane was hit. It caught fire, but he refused to go back. He actually flew out there, completed his mission, then flew back to the aircraft carrier, but he wasn't going to make it. He had to eject out of the plane, and he floated in the Pacific Ocean for about 4 hours before being picked up by a submarine. Unfortunately, his crew members didn't make it, and Bush was filled with remorse over this for the rest of his life. Now, when Bush met Barbara Pierce, she was only 16, but he went back after the war, they got married, and eventually had 6 children. The oldest, of course, was George W. Bush. Now, the second child, Robin, she developed leukemia at the age of 3. Bush would later say that he had a really hard time trying to comfort her while she was in pain. He had a hard time looking into her eyes. She passed away before the age of 4. And when Bush was in the White House, he always kept a picture of little Robin on his desk, along with another photo of the crew members that died during that bombing mission. But George and Barbara had more children. Bush's father, Prescott, became a senator. They got involved in the oil business. They also got involved in Republican politics. They made a lot of money. Bush himself became a congressman. Then he became a senator. Now, for a Republican conservative in the 60s, he had some liberal views. For example, he was pro-life when it came to abortion. Bush also supported President Johnson's Civil Rights Act. And for his support, he actually got death threats. In fact, the wife of a friend called him to say he was no longer welcome in her home. Bush became ambassador to the United Nations. He also became the U.S. ambassador to China and later became the director of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. He also became chairman of the Republican Party. Now, Bush ran against Reagan for the Republican nomination to president. He actually called Reagan's economic plan voodoo economics, but Reagan was more charismatic. However, he did choose Bush to become his vice presidential candidate. They didn't like each other at first, but they grew to respect each other. However, the wives, well, not so much. Bush ran for president again in 1988. People were a little bit tired of Republicans after 8 years. He also chose running mate Indiana Senator Dan Quayle, who seemed a little goofy to say the least. And Bush had an image problem. People thought he was kind of wimpy and preppy, despite his World War II heroism. Now, lucky for Bush, he was running against Governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis. When you have a name like Dukakis and you're very, very short, well, you got a bit of an image problem of your own. Now, Massachusetts had a weekend furlough program in prisons. That's when, let's just say you're in prison for 5 or 6 years. During your last year, you're allowed to get out on the weekend so you can adjust to everyday life. However, Michael Dukakis allowed lifers, people that were doing life sentences, to get out of jail on the weekends. This was very controversial. And one lifer, Willie Horton, on one of his weekend furloughs, he got out, raped a woman, and beat up her boyfriend. Well, the Republicans jumped all over that and made Dukakis look soft on crime. And I have to say, I agree. And during all this negative campaigning, Bush repeated over and over and over again, "Read my lips. No new taxes." Well, needless to say, Bush became the 41st president. His administration started out promising. He signed the Americans with Disability Act. He formed a more lenient immigration law, but he angered mothers across the land when he told everybody that he hated broccoli. Now, President and dictator of Panama, Manuel Noriega, was smuggling drugs, and the United States kind of looked the other way because he used to be a CIA informant. He also allowed the U.S. to transport military weapons through Panama to Central American countries. However, when Noriega started spying for Cuba and selling Cuban drugs into the United States, the U.S. decided enough was enough. U.S. troops marched in. They took over Panama and they caught Manuel Noriega. He was transported to a Miami jail to do prison time. But corruption in Panama continued. It says, as somebody said once, they caught Alibaba, but they forgot the 40 thieves. Then the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein. Well, Iraq invaded Kuwait. They were after the oil wells, and the United States said this cannot be tolerated. But Bush didn't just send in troops. Look at this. Look at the long list of countries that joined the United States in the coalition that Bush formed to fight against Iraq. When they finally went in there, they bombed the crap out of Iraq, then sent in the troops, and it was a very short war. It was called Operation Desert Storm. The U.S. chased the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. But Saddam Hussein, in revenge, decided to burn all the oil wells. Look at that. The fires lasted for over a year. A terrible environmental disaster. Now, Bush did not have the troops go into Iraq to overthrow Saddam Hussein because he knew it would be easy to overthrow Saddam Hussein, but it's a lot harder to occupy another country. Besides that, he didn't want to weaken Iraq too much. Remember, Iran is right next door. A weak Iraq means a strong Iran and destabilization in the Middle East. Now, Saudi Arabia had allowed the coalition, U.S. troops, to go through Saudi Arabia into Iran. And, well, a lot of Muslims thought this defiled their country. Among these people was Osama bin Laden. When Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to be the first African American in the Supreme Court, allegations of sexual abuse were directed against Thomas by a co-worker, Anita Hill. Now, Thomas did get his nomination, but the hearings were very ugly. Bush began speaking agreements about NAFTA, a trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to revive the stagnant Soviet economy. He allowed glasnost, that was of new openness, a little bit of freedom of the press. He allowed political prisoners to get out of jail. He did perestroika, which is a Soviet restructuring of the economy. He would allow the Soviet satellite countries to kind of decide their own fate. Little did he knew that this was the beginning of the end. Bulgaria did away with the communist system. So did Poland and Hungary and Austria and Czechoslovakia. Now, in Romania, the leader, Ceausescu, was a very brutal man. He had been leading for many, many years with a lot of repression. But when the Romanian Revolution broke out, well, there was no stopping the rebels. They overthrew Ceausescu. The rebels were jubilant. Ceausescu and his wife tried to get away by helicopter, but they were caught. They were tried, and they were convicted. You can see them in this picture right here, being executed by firing squad. Now remember that after World War II, Germany had been divided into two, East and West, and they were divided by a wall, the Berlin Wall, the symbol of the Cold War. Well, that wall came down. People were hugging in the streets. Family members that had not seen each other in many, many years. A symbol of the Cold War had been taken down. Germany was once again reunited. But during all of this, George Bush did not gloat. He didn't celebrate. He allowed the Soviet leader to save face, thereby giving the United States better trade deals. Well, some hardliners in the Soviet Union decided to hold a coup. They tried to overtake the government They had Gorbachev put under house arrest. Well, they failed. Gorbachev was reinstated, his enemies were put in jail, but his government was now a weakened government. The Soviet Union was no more. It would now be turned into Russia. Communism had failed, and the Cold War was over. One of the last phone calls that Gorbachev made was to George Bush. It was amazing. Now, today Russia is going through a lot of economic turmoil. There's a cultural war going on. You look at these young people, they look a little rebellious to say the least, and it's going to take a time for them to stabilize. Now, in the United States, the economy was in a very bad state. There was a recession going on, and Bush made a deal with the Democrats. He would have spending cuts, but he would raise taxes on luxury items. This was breaking his promise, remember? In 1988, Bush had promised not to raise taxes. Well, now the Republicans felt betrayed, and the Democrats felt that he was a liar. They also felt that Bush was kind of out of touch. There was a story that he had never seen a supermarket scanner, and he was amazed by looking at it. And now in 1992, presidential year, Bush was being challenged by a billionaire, Ross Perot, and a charismatic Democrat by the name of Bill Clinton of the Democratic Party. So Bush had to deal again with the preppy image, the privileged man who was out of touch, and he had to do all of this while presiding over a bad economy. Around this time, he went to Japan, and he was sitting at a state dinner. He had the stomach flu, but he was trying to do the best he could. Unfortunately, he vomited, and he vomited all over the Japanese Prime Minister. Well, everybody was very nice. They were very worried about him. He got up and saved face and walked away, but it didn't do very much for his image. Well, this was embarrassing. Now, the economy was starting to get better. The tax cuts were working, but it was too late. Clinton was elected. Now, Bush, in his final months as president, gave out a pardon to those that were involved in Iran-Contra. And in Somalia, where there was civil war and a lot of famine, Bush sent troops. He joined the United Nations coalitions in sending troops to try to get the food and medicine to the people. It is said that they probably saved about 100,000 lives. Now, during the Bush years, Ted Bundy, serial killer, was executed. Princess Diana and Prince Charles got separated. There was a massacre in Tiananmen Square in China. Pete Rose of the Cincinnati Reds was banned from baseball for life. Mayor Marion Barry of Washington, D.C. was arrested for cocaine. The Hubble telescope began taking beautiful pictures. It was a debut of the World Wide Web. Hurricane Andrew decimated South Florida. It was also the time of the Rodney King riots. 50 people were dead in the LA riots. Chicago Bulls began winning their first series of championships. Eileen Wuornos, serial killer, killed 7 men, was convicted to the death penalty. The Catholic Church apologized for condemning Galileo in 1633, and the Church of England began to allow women priests. It was a time for big films. We had Batman, The Little Mermaid, Goodfellas, and Dances with Wolves. Unforgiven gave Clint Eastwood his first Oscar, and speaking of Oscars, Al Pacino finally got an Oscar after 7 nominations. Home Alone broke box office records, and Beauty and the Beast became the first animated film to be nominated for an Academy Award. There was controversy surrounding the film JFK. The film Ghost broke box office records. Whitney Houston married Bobby Brown. And when Eric Clapton's son died in the fall, he dedicated his next song, Tears in Heaven, to him. Michael Jackson signed a contract with Sony for $1 billion. Sinead O'Connor tore up a picture of the Pope on live television. Gloria Estefan got into a very bad bus accident, cracking her vertebrae. Farm Aid raised millions for farmers across the United States. Milli Vanilli got caught lip-syncing to their hit song. One of them later committed suicide. It was the time of the Bangles and the B-52s. Madonna's video Justify My Love was banned on MTV. Sadly, George Bush's mother died at the age of 91. Now, Bush saw one of his sons become president and the other become a presidential candidate. He became friends with Bill Clinton. They both joined to help in humanitarian aid around the world. Now, Bush celebrated his 90th birthday by skydiving. Now, his health hasn't been all that lately, but he and Barbara celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary not too long ago. Recently, Bush was given an award, and his granddaughter picked up the award for him. He jokingly said that he did not attend because they would be serving broccoli. Well, everybody, thank you for watching. This is Cool Talk.